Welcome to Off Panel.
Yo everybody, welcome to Off Panel. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the cartoonist behind the excellent webcomics Stonebreaker and Over the Wall. It's Peter Wartman. Thanks for coming on, Peter.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So I wanted to start at the beginning for you. Over the Wall and Stonebreaker are, as near as I can tell, your first comics you've made that the public has seen. And I know you went to MCAD for art school. What was your path to comics, and how big of a factor was your art school experience in that regard?
I think fairly key. I wasn't really wanting to do comics, when I went to art school. I had some good teachers and sort of got pushed in that direction. It's maybe a little, not quite that way, but, I do feel like I really got into comics in art school.
Mm-hmm.
I think partially because that was the first time I really got to see, that there's all these other things you could do besides the sort of superhero thing. That I hadn't really been aware of. So, I suppose that's where that started.
So if I actually read a number of interviews with you, and one of the things I saw was that the person who actually publishes in print your books, Tom Kaczynski,
was one of my teachers. Yeah.
Exactly. So was he like an influence in you getting into comics, or was there somebody that helped you unlock your interest in comics, or was it just kind of discovering other voices outside of like the X-Men or whatever?
Yeah, there's a lot of that. I had a great teacher named Terry Beatty who was my first intro to comics class, and he just sort of had this. He had us go through the history of comics, right? So lots of looking at Wally Wood and all those guys,
mm-hmm.
In kind of the EC Comics era. So I sort of got the sense of okay, this is a much wider kind of world. And then sort of on my own, I started looking at Miyazaki and all that stuff, getting that. Just figuring out, there's a lot more out there, kind of Mobius or these people who are working in sort of weird sci-fi things that I hadn't really known about. I'm trying to condense years of kind of just going everywhere.
No, that's fine. Yeah, I'm interested in the whole story just because when I was growing up, I actually. Yeah. I had a different story than you. I grew up reading comics. I was a huge X-Men fan. I read Marvel's Transformer comics, et cetera, et cetera. And then I worked in a comic shop, and because of that, I discovered comics outside of superheroes, and I was like, "What is this stuff?"
Yeah.
And now that's kind of more my world than just reading X-Men comics or reading Spider-Man or something like that. I have this whole world that was unlocked because I discovered one comic, and everyone I think kind of has that story to a certain degree because you can't just stick with superheroes forever. I think.
Yeah. Well, I guess my one comic was Hellboy. So that was sort of. And that was the first art I saw that was really this is something different, right? And, this character, he's not just he's sort of a different kind of character, and these stories are weird, and they're sort of these fantasy things. I feel like that was the first one I really saw that was not Green Lantern or something. That was I did read some of that growing up, but I was super into that kind of story. So maybe that was my one comic that kind of was a click,
That's a really good one. I mean, it actually fits given the fact that I actually never heard of the whole naming thing, in comic or in any story about naming demons and how the power you get from them until I read Mignola. And I think it was an issue of Hellboy where that came up, and I was like, whoa.
I'm pretty sure that's where this comes from. Yeah.
Oh, you mean for Stonebreaker?
For my own stuff, yeah. I mean, I'm not people ask me a lot about if I'm really into mythology and stuff, and that's not really where my influence comes from. So probably Hellboy more than anything. I'm going to be honest.
Yeah, and I could actually see some Mignola in your work just because the way that you use shadows and the way that you use kind of the mix of blacks and whites. You kind of do it in a way that is Mignola-esque. I'm not saying that you're necessarily. He is probably on the Mount Rushmore of at least modern comic artists. Yeah. But I mean, I can see that in your work, and I think that that's great. It's cool that that's your one comic.
Yeah, I mean, like I used to really copy him a lot, kind of in the early college years. So like I have some of that interest in like black spotting and using shadows like that. So that's persisted for sure. I mean, I think like artists like Jeff Smith, he's been a big influence in kind of what I do. The Bone Guy,
Mm-hmm.
or yeah, Miyazaki. Yeah, I have to bring him up. Like his storytelling has been something that I really have started to admire more and more. So yeah, those are kind of the things that I'd like to steal from.
I have to ask actually. So this is a huge long shot. But okay, well,
Yeah.
first off, do you play video games at all?
Not too much.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Um,
Well, your work kind of reminds me of this one video game
Shadow of the
director.
Colossus.
I was gonna say
Yeah.
Fumito Ueda.
Yeah. Uh-huh. That's yeah, you're catching on to something that is absolutely there. Yeah, I love that game. It's been a huge influence too. Actually, like I was going to be like I wanted to be a concept artist when I went to school. That was my main interest. Before comics kind of like took became something that was more wanted to do. I kind of figured out that like the thing that interested me about games was storytelling,
Mm-hmm.
right? And sort of like this world building and sort of this creating this place you can inhabit. Not so much like the gameplay itself. So the comics are more of a fit for that, I think, for my own like personal interests. But I mean, like Shadow of the Colossus, that's like the way that game tells a story in such a like, kind of a subtle way, and the world building is so much in the background. It's not really over explained, and that kind of that mystery like that I really love. That's something I've tried to kind of capture, I guess, like just that idea of not explaining everything to the reader, or like kind of leaving some stuff up to interpretation. That mystery is cool. I love that kind of thing. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I actually I think the funny thing is like the guy's other games. I don't know if you ever played Eco or then recently there was also I haven't played The Last Guardian, but the thing is one of the things that actually kind of reminds me of his stuff in your work is there's like a real sense of quiet and like almost loneliness to it.
Yep.
And I it's kind of hard to explain unless you've played the games, but it's funny because when I read those comics, I'm just like, this kind of reminds me of those games. Not in a way that you're like straight stealing or something like that, but like the feel. It's something you don't really experience in storytelling very often, just because I think people love being upfront with what's going on, and people love like kind of making. They want to make the world feel lived in quite often in a way by just being in your face about it.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring that. I think like interesting you bring that up because I think Stonebreaker is very much about like loneliness and kind of this emptiness, feeling kind of cut off from society or something, and trying to deal with that, just kind of being an outsider. I think those are the kind of the themes that I sort of want to explore with these stories. Yes, like the sound effect usually, that whistling like wind or something in the background is kind of what I'm always thinking about when I'm drawing those like big empty hallways. Those like kind of like kind of cold. Like there's not really any like furniture or anything in like the buildings I draw. It's sort of like weirdly uninhabited in some way. This big city. So I mean, it doesn't really make much sense in terms of like a place that's real that someone lives in, but it's. I guess I was kind of more interested in like creating that feeling that this is sort of this weird, empty place. Yeah, where it's almost kind of it's a place where humans aren't meant to be, right? It's not really a place you can live. Yeah, I don't know.
No, that makes perfect sense, and I think you accomplished that feeling really, really well. And actually, it actually ties in really well to something I've always been fascinated by, which is like cities and and visiting them when they're like at their most empty. Like I love when I'm traveling that I try to get really, really early. Like I was in Prague once, and you go to Prague and like that place is just insane all the time. So I got up at like 5 a.m. when it just so I could see some of the landmarks without infinity people on them, and it's like you're seeing a secret version of the world.
Yeah, I mean, it's that weird like it feels wrong. Right?
Exactly.
Like, all these like this place should have people in it. Why something's happened? Sort of that post-apocalyptic thing almost.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, so I want to actually, before we get too much further into Stonebreaker, I actually just discovered the book this week because of a tweet storm by Hannah Blumenreich about webcomics and how people should be reading more. And I was like, I'm gonna take note of that. I'm gonna start reading some of these. And the first one I picked up was yours, and I was like, what the hell is wrong with me? Why am I not reading this? So for listeners out there who haven't heard of or read Stonebreaker, what's it all about?
So Stonebreaker and Over the Wall, they both take place in this big abandoned city that's only inhabited by these weird demon creatures. And in Over the Wall, Anya, this young girl, has to go rescue her brother who's been lost in the city. She sort of meets these weird creatures, sort of has adventures. And the first story is very straightforward, sort of, just rescuing her brother. And the next story is more about the consequences of that, sort of the like what happens when you break a taboo, and sort of I don't know, sort of like end up like how do you deal with making something you think is a good idea and sort of ends up being a mistake. I don't know. Honestly, like I'm still trying to kind of figure out the best way to kind of condense it. One of those problems about working on a story for so long is that the meaning changes over time. So
yeah, and one of the funny things about like storytelling too is like sometimes I feel you need some distance to really be able to say that 10,000-foot view story. Like to me, it's I don't know, when I'm reading it, it's more, it's like it's about Anya. I feel like an idiot. I'm explaining your story to you.
No, thank you. I'm really bad at like condensing my story down because I have it all piled up in my head, and I never like just condense it into those like few sentences. But please continue. I'm actually curious, like what. What are you getting out of it?
To me, it's about Anya and Taurus the demon, and them finding themselves in this lost world as like they both feel like outsiders from their people, and it's kind of like a I don't want to say coming of age because I feel like that's kind of inaccurate. But
I think it kind of is. The first story for sure is like there's even like kind of a coming of age ceremony that happens with it,
right?
And there's also the fact, I wrote this story like right after I left college, when I was kind of like out in the world for the first time, kind of without, you always have the direction of being in school and always having everything kind of planned out for you. And then suddenly you're in this big city, and you have to kind of figure out your own way. So I think I was kind of in that mindset where it is sort of like this coming of age, right?
Yeah.
You just sort of like, here's the world, figure it out.
And that's one of the things I love the most about the book, though, is that you have Anya and you have Taurus, who just feel like they're both outsiders to their own people, and they find kind of a confederate in each other, and like they go on, not to oversimplify it, but they're on an adventure where they're kind of figuring what exactly the story behind everything is. And I don't know, I love it, but I was really curious, when you first started putting together Over the Wall, did you know you were going to do Stonebreaker as well, or did you figure that out as you were working on it?
Over the Wall was going to be a one-off. Like I designed it specifically to be a short, concise story, because I hadn't really managed to finish anything yet. So, like I thought it would just be, I'd write this one story with a simple plot, and that'd be it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I figured out that I really liked the characters a lot, and that there's like this weird stuff going on in the city that I had to explore some more. So, I came back to it, but it wasn't planned. I just sort of couldn't leave it. And now I'm like, God, when I started writing this thing, 2013, so I've been doing this for a while. So Stonebreaker became a gigantic story, as fantasy stories tend to do. But I still enjoy it. So
yeah, I could see why you'd get hooked on it though, because it's like once you start telling these characters' stories, especially the way it's left off, it's pretty clear that while it could have ended there could be more to their story. I have to admit, when I first read Over the Wall, and Anya named Taurus, and like there's like that I don't even know how to describe it. It's like there's like this black something that comes out of him behind him, and like he becomes like this full version of himself, or at least the more full version. I was like, I read that and I was just like, I was like extremely moved by it. I don't know what it was about it, but I was so glad that I had actually started reading Stonebreaker first, and I was like, I need to go back and read the beginning.
Right.
When I got to that point, I was like, he would have been a crazy person if he didn't keep this going.
Yeah. I think maybe that scene maybe was, I don't know. Something about like her giving him the name. I was like, okay, so this, how does this end? Like I sort of wanted to know too. So like there's that, 'cause I felt like a big connection had been made, and that really seemed dangerous in some ways or something. I'm not sure. But it was, I wasn't finished yet. So there's more story.
It wasn't a period. It was a periods of ellipsis.
Yeah.
So I want to ask about your process in both like a micro and a macro sense. Like on the macro side, when you were first getting into Stonebreaker after Over the Wall, how much of the story did you plot out, and did you know where you were going to theoretically end before you even started?
I had like everything planned out. I had, an outline and everything. It was all ready to go. Had it totally figured out. And then I've changed it about 3 times since then, completely.
The end point, or like you're having like tangents?
I mean, the end point is kind of the same, but like the characters have changed a lot. The story's changed a lot. Where everything's going to go. In some ways, this is my first time doing something this large and over this long a period of time. So I don't think I've really like figured out, the optimal way of handling something like this. But I kind of found it, like as much as I tried to plan it out beforehand, it keeps changing as my interests change and sort of where I want to bring the story, if that makes sense. So it's a somewhat chaotic process, but maybe it has to be.
Well, no, I mean, I think it actually makes sense because the way that you're rolling it out, you're rolling out. How many are you just doing a page a week now, or is it 2 pages? Or
I'm doing 2 pages a week. Yeah.
Okay. So the way that you're rolling it out, because you have your day job, because you kind of have flexibility that you wouldn't have if you had like hard deadlines and everything like that. It seems like that could lead to a more free-flowing process where you could take tangents, or we could go in different directions if it just feels right. Once you start, you're going on this journey with them, and you're figuring it out as you go along.
I suppose so. It'll be interesting if I ever get like a job where I have those deadlines to see how the process changes. I mean, it's always weird because this is my only experience with writing something this long, so I don't know. It's hard to compare it to any other process. This just feels natural. I don't know how you could not change a story if you're working on it like over 3 years. Because I mean, just the place I'm at, just in my own, the way I understand the world right now has changed a lot too. So like, the way the things I want to focus on in the story are going to change, and it's interesting. How that all morphs.
So when it comes page to page, when you're working on like the upcoming pages that are coming along, what's your process? Do you script it out, figure it out in layouts, or how do you work exactly?
So I write a script that's pretty much a movie script. Like there's no panel breakouts or page breakouts, just because I find that to be distracting.
Sure.
I just want to, like, if I'm writing dialogue, I just want to write dialogue and not have to worry about cutting it up. And then I do thumbnails, like all in a Photoshop document, just all laid out next to each other, so I can kind of keep track of the how the pages are going to work in context. And that's where I will figure out like where the dialogue goes and what I can delete and kind of edit. And I think that's really that's when you're really making comics, is in the layout stage, in the thumbnail stage, when you're just thinking about like where are all the characters going to be, where are the panels going to be. And that's the hardest part, where you have to focus. And then the rest I do in a program called Clip Studio, or used to be Manga Studio. Pretty standard, pencils, inks, grayscale, nothing too special. But it's all digital.
So when you So when you're scripting, do you script out chunks at a time, or are you doing one page at a time and then going into art, or how does that process work?
I script the whole thing. So
Oh,
I have a script for the rest of the story, more or less. Like there's a second half that haven't really done more than just some outlining. But I wrote it all out, and
oh.
I kind of constantly go back and change it. Uh,
It's funny because I talk to a lot of artists who say that when they work digitally, that's when they get into like that obsessive. I'm gonna fix everything, and then I keep not that period where you're in this constant loop of trying to fix things,
yeah.
and then you actually don't really get anything done. It
If you
sounds
want to talk about, yeah, sorry. If you want to talk about that, I can talk about the times I went back and changed the entire first half of the chapter, of
wow.
chapter one, like redrew it entirely. So it's there.
You mean
Uh,
after you published it?
if you got the if you buy the book version of Stonebreaker, you'll see the changes. And Over the Wall is even more. Like I changed even more in that story. So yeah, I'm guilty of going back and fiddling with things that I shouldn't.
Oh, it sounds like you have a vision as to what you want and an idea
Yeah.
in your head, and sometimes that happens. I know, have you ever read Bad Machinery? It's a webcomic.
Oh yeah. I know
Yeah,
what you're talking about.
so it's by this guy named John Allison, and
Yep,
when
yep.
he's been doing the print versions of that book, I'm pretty sure I had him on my podcast and we talked about it, and I'm pretty sure he was saying that he was going back and fixing some of the art or for one of the actual mysteries, one of the books, he actually added more pages to it because he felt like it needed a little bit something more to tie the whole thing together.
Absolutely,
And
yeah.
I think that is a common trait with people who have, when you have the ability to flex and we have not murderously killer deadlines and everything like that, you can do those things and it can
Yeah.
make the comics way better.
Yeah, I think the thing, like, if I was writing this as a novel and I went back and I changed the first chapter, that's just how you write novels, right? Like
Right.
that's just standard. Like the only reason we can't do it with comics is because that's another year of my life, right?
Hmm.
Because it just takes so much time. But I mean, I guess I was kind of talking about, how much the story's changed. And there are things, in those first chapters where I'm setting up stuff that doesn't really matter anymore. Like
Hmm.
the story's changed so much that that's sort of like it's not as important as I thought it would be. Or there's things I wish I could go back and kind of like set up, for the later story that I hadn't really thought about back then, right? 'Cause you never know how the story should begin until you've kind of ended it.
Hmm.
Yeah, so but you have to kind of let it go because comics take a lot of time, and it's sort of that trade-off. Yeah.
I do think it's funny that I know a lot of artists who say that they don't go back to look at their previous work because they're just like, I don't want to see that. That was like a different guy doing it, basically. But for you go back and look at it, and then you're like, I'm going to fix this. Which
Well,
is
'cause I don't like it so yeah. No, I mean I do have trouble. Like I need to force myself to like read the story over and over again, right? Like to go back and read it.
Mhm.
So I don't like looking at it. But just to keep it consistent, I have to force myself to think about it. And then I always see all the flaws, and I can change that. But,
How much do you
Right.
think? How much do you feel like your art has changed? I mean, I think it's changed quite a bit since you started,
Yeah.
or since you did Over the Wall. But do you feel like as you've moved along, and because again, this is your first comic more or less, do you feel like you've really started to understand your voice as an artist as you've moved from Over the Wall and further into Stonebreaker?
I feel like I'm getting there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like I have a better sense of like where I want to take this thing or how I want to yeah, what my look should be or whatever the thing is. I don't know. I mean, like part of it, I'm always probably going to be dissatisfied with where I'm at because that's just sort of the way us artists are. That's why we keep going forward. So
One thing I really appreciate about the way that you tell a story is that some updates, like I feel like to a certain degree for webcomics, inertia is a thing. Like you want to keep that
Yeah.
momentum going. But I appreciate that sometimes you actually have just pages that are environments or they're just like the world and stuff like that. And there's especially when you're reading it like as I did, where I was reading it, rather quickly. It gives it a really nice pacing to it, and it makes the world feel a lot more lived in.
Yep. Another nice thing about doing like a whole page of like an environment to ground somebody is that for all the other pages you can just drop out the background entirely. So there's a so I like setting up, here's the place, here's a really detailed scene, where you're at. I can just kind of forget about it for the next few pages and you'll just fill in the details. Um, but yeah, I mean, I do think I think pausing in a story and just being in the place for a couple moments is really important, and just charging through, and trying to tell as much a story as possible, as quickly as possible, can kind of kill a story. You have to sometimes just stop and watch someone walk down a hall, and that's going to it's going to create a different mood. Mm-hmm. And that's really important, I think, to, telling a good story. So
I think one of the things that, when I'm engaging with the story, one of the things that bothers me the most is when it's like somebody's clearly trying to always have these high points where it's always like something big happening. And you mentioned Jeff Smith earlier. One of my favorite things about Bone is the fact that is a book that takes its time and feels free to throw in some lazy moments. I mean, that is Smiley Bone's life, and I love it for it.
I mean, you need contrast for the highs to have any impact. You need to be able to see the characters in a different place too, right? Mm-hmm. So
absolutely.
Otherwise, it just becomes exhausting.
Oh God, so exhausting. Yeah. I'm a leisurely man in my own right, so I appreciate that in it. But so the comic itself is mostly black and white with some tones and the occasional like purplish pink, which leads into something I want to ask about because like I said, I read other interviews with you, and you're colorblind when it comes to certain colors. Instead of not just using colors, you use ones that work for you as accents in certain situations. I think it works out really great. How did deciding to use certain colors on your work come together initially, besides just black and white?
Well, are you talking about like the colors I use on the in the comic in Stonebreaker?
Yeah. So
just those like flashback scenes
in like the flashbacks and everything. Yeah. Like it could have just been straight black and white, but you used that those the kind of purplish pink, like I said, to kind of signify that it's a flashback.
Of course, I think it's blue, but
God, and the worst part for me is like my wife is an architect, and she is so good with colors, and I look at a color and I'm like, I don't know, I can't describe it well. So it very well could be I'm just very bad at describing colors.
I can't do color at all. Like it's just all right. To be honest, like that part I didn't think about too much. I knew I wanted to have like a different color to kind of give this little clue that something else was happening, and that just felt right.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I have a sort of a contentious relationship with color. Maybe that's what I want to say. Like I get, it stresses me out. It's sort of like this. It's hard for me to deal with just because I can't see it terribly well. So it's partially why I like that comics are allowed to be black and white and focus on shape and color or shape and shadow and all that stuff that I'm more interested in. So.
That actually ties into something I want to ask you about is, I think a lot of times because there's all those other elements to comics that it's like a line artist can, take it easy because they know the colorist is going to fill in the blanks.
Yeah.
Do you feel that in some ways removing color from the equation for the most part makes you spend more time maxing out what you do with the black and white and how you think about shadows? And, I posted that one picture from Stonebreaker.
Right, the hallway, which you sort of... Yeah, watching it go. Yep.
And people were gaga about the perspective you put on it, but like not a lot of people do that. Do you feel like not having color makes you kind of just blow it all out on the other end?
Yeah, maybe it because those are the things. Yeah, that's what I kind of focused on as I kind of was learning how to do art was that stuff. Like, maybe so. Yeah. I certainly, because I don't color every page, like I do have more time I can spend on that stuff. So yeah, I guess that makes sense to me.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I really love about the world of, this ties in perfectly into that is I love how in Stonebreaker the architecture really makes the world feel alive. And it's not just in the design, but quite often you really just don't take it easy on yourself. The long hallways that you had in that one shot. What is it about architecture and like the literal world building that makes you want to go all out? And also, like, what kind of research did you put in? Like, is this built on real world examples, or is this kind of coming straight from your brain?
I do have like a folder full of like old kind of ruins, like Palmyra and stuff, and just sort of places from around the world. So yeah, I did look at a bunch of stuff. Nowhere specifically.
You go really in depth on the architecture, and it's
right. Yeah.
The world is really built up. Like, what is it about the is that something you particularly enjoy drawing, or is it just something that you think is really important to the nature of the story?
I do think both. Yeah. I do like drawing those complicated backgrounds for whatever reason. And yeah, I read comics sometimes that don't really care about the place that they're set in or the backgrounds, and it always feels strange to me. Like there's no so like the context again. Like why are the characters? Where are the characters? Why are they there? Like how does the environment change their their mood? How is it reflected? Like there's just so much you can kind of do with that. That it feels like it's important to kind of take time to think about what it says. Yeah, I don't know. I'm interested in architecture. Just sort of, I like looking at it. I'm not super knowledgeable about just like what actually goes into it, but yeah, just that kind of like. There's a history, just in these structures without anybody in them, right? Like there's a story that's told just by like how they were built, or like even if it's like not an old building, like just some ugly condo that's like built on a lot somewhere, like that means something too. Like what does that say about the city? What does it say about this place? Like there's just so much you can kind of play with that stuff that I don't know. It's fun.
I think that really ties into that stuff I was talking about earlier with Fumito Ueda, in the sense that like, it really sells that feeling of loneliness and quietness in Stonebreaker, because you have this huge built up beautiful city and there's nobody in it.
I mean, it's what you're saying about like walking around on a city street at night. It feels lonely because of that contrast, right? Like if you're walking around in a forest and you're alone, that makes sense. Or you're walking through a desert and you're alone, that makes sense. But to be in a place that should be full of people, right? Exactly. Yeah.
It's like the kind of contrast, because the lack of people there. But one of my favorite parts was right towards the beginning of Stonebreaker, and it was when one of the demons was chasing after Anya, and he's this God, I forgot, who's he, the builder?
He's just called the builder. Yeah. He's got a really long, complicated name that I don't remember either. So
I love when he punches the ground to hit her, and he's so upset that he damaged the city. Like that was just like, he's like, oh no.
Yeah.
There was something about that where I was just like, God, that is great. I can't even explain it. It's just a great feeling.
I mean, I do like kind of trying to give like the characters like make them a little more complicated than they first appear, right? Like this big monster, like he's just trying to kill her. He must just be evil and all about destruction, but not quite. Like there's something weirder going on with him. Something a little. Probably a little more depressing, but he's not just about destroying things. He's got we'll get into it.
I love that he took 2 steps forward and 1 step backwards, because he's like, oh, I'm gonna fix this, this statue, and then I'm gonna punch this girl, but then I'm gonna have to fix that ground. It's like he can never
get distracted from his main goal.
He can never have the homeostasis level that he wants to get to.
Gotta have your characters have dichotomies, man.
Exactly.
The giant monsters just want to break things and fix them too. Yeah.
So I want to talk about the cast a little bit. I love Anya. Anya is such a phenomenal lead, and she's filled with so much like spark and vitality that she kind of fills up the city in her own right.
Sure.
What made making her a young woman the right answer, and what is it about her that speaks to you so much as a storyteller?
So something I kind of realized recently was that she's pretty much my sister. Like her characteristics are very close to my sister's personality. A little bit, yeah. Like I mean, like, you know how you always like you build characters kind of from people you know and stuff. Um, if for some reason like here's it is. Her character like had sort of seemed to fit the story I wanted to tell here, right? Where she's sort of willing to rush into danger, like that just makes it kind of easy to get her into trouble, right? Which is, you know, what you really want from a lead. So yeah, I think that's kind of why I went for that. Why is she a girl? I don't know. I think it just seemed right.
Yeah,
seemed to fit. So yeah.
Especially given the fact that Over the Wall started with the whole like she's going to rescue her brother from the
right.
like
kind of invert that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it makes a lot of sense too, and yeah, I just think she's a phenomenal character, and I love you wouldn't have much of a story if the story was like Anya is the person who abides by the rules and just looks over the wall and is like, God, that would be pretty cool to go over there.
You got to have somebody making mistakes.
Yeah, exactly.
It makes it a lot more fun. Yeah.
Yeah, but I do like the fact that I don't know. I'm a firm believer in the idea that you don't really regret things that you do. You regret things that you don't do. She is one person who definitely subscribes to that idea.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, it's interesting too to play with those consequences though. 'Cause she's done things for the right reasons, but they're not necessarily clean, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's consequences that just because the way the world is, things will happen sometimes that are bad.
Well,
right?
yeah.
Even if you try to do the right thing. So, and just trying to deal with that is interesting to me. So, yeah.
I'm not going to get into it because I don't want to spoil it for the people who are going to start reading it now. But I generally speaking, we don't really know what the situation with her brother is. Did she make the right choice? Who knows? Right. Eventually, we might find out. But
is it her brother?
Is it her brother? Exactly. Yeah.
Probably.
But I want to talk about the co-lead, if you will, Taurus the demon.
Yeah.
I have to bring up Fumito Ueda again. He always loves pairing the human characters with non-human characters.
Yeah.
What made you want to have a counterpoint character like Taurus to literally show how the other side lives?
I mean, part of like just character-wise, like I wanted to have, you know, Anya's very rushing into danger, and Taurus is, especially in Stonebreaker, very much like let's not antagonize anybody. So they have that, you know, that push and pull. I mean, making him into a weird monster creature is mostly because I wanted to draw weird monster creatures, and that's part of the whole reason I was doing Stonebreaker in the first place. But I mean, like, yeah.
I also like how he's kind of the nerd and she's the jock.
Right, right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's exactly what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a funny like back and forth between them, and it's part of the reason why they're such a good pair is because like
he's so always, they have that contrast and that kind of like they're always pushing at each other.
Exactly. Like she's always like, let's do this. He's like, are you sure we should do this? And then she's gone.
And sometimes she's right, and sometimes she's right. Like that's why I kind of that's what makes it fun to sort of like they balance each other out in some ways. Like not enough like to keep them from falling into big trouble, but yeah.
So I want to ask some questions about webcomics in general. Why did you decide to release Stonebreaker and actually Over the Wall initially on the web alone?
I think mostly because like I didn't really think there's any other way to do it, honestly, and I knew that doing it on the web was a pretty like low barrier to entry, and you can kind of I knew a little bit of coding already, so it seemed like an easy way to do it. I mean, there's not that much more than that, really. Like it was just I wanted to get something out there, and that was the most straightforward way I knew. So
I have to say, I really like. I don't know what it is about it, but when I was reading it initially, I'm like, I really like how this loads. I don't know what it is, but I'm just like I when I click on the picture and it goes to the next one, I'm like, that's nice. I like.
So I'm not loading the whole page. I'm just loading the image, right? So it makes it a little quicker.
Yeah. But so you started in 2000. You started Over the Wall in 2011. You started Stonebreaker in 2013. How has your audience grown since then? And how do you feel, from your perspective, the world of webcomics have changed over that stretch as well?
I mean, the world's changed. It went from like just a few people doing pretty good stuff to like. I think there's like a million like comics out there now, and all of them are like amazing.
Yeah.
It's kind of overwhelming. So I mean, it's gone from being a very wide open place to being like there's a lot of competition now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like getting noticed is pretty hard. My audience hasn't. It's okay. I mean, I'm not like getting huge amounts of people or anything. I'm definitely in the very low tiers of webcomics in terms of audience, but I mean, it's growing all right. Yeah. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say I noticed in one of the posts you made that you had like links from IO9, and I can say from personal experience that IO9 has a tendency of adding a lot, at least initially. But I mean, like I remember I was linked, my site was linked to by IO9, and I was like, damn, I got a lot of people coming to my site. This is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I think I got like twice the. I think IO9 linked to my site, and I got like as many people visited in that like week as visited in the entire like lifetime of my site before that. So, you know, you get like one website, and that kind of changes things, but it tapers off. So.
Well, that's one of the tricky things about webcomics, and I'm very, very guilty of this. Sometimes it can be hard for people to keep coming back because,
I mean, especially for long form stories like this, where it's like, okay, this is just a page of a hallway. I don't know, not too much story got told.
Well, even beyond that, it's just like I find myself I'll like binge read webcomics, and then I'll kind of like go away for a while, and then I'll come back and binge read again, and it's like it seems like it's kind of difficult to plan based off of that. It's like you don't know when these people are going to be coming back and how they're going to be reading or what.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like a logical way to read a comic too. So I can't really blame them. I mean, that's partially like I'm putting out like books now that I'm sort of self-publishing. Because I think that might be an okay way of doing this. I'm not a business person. Don't listen to me a bit about business. But I mean, like I think like people they want to have it actually in their hands too, even if you make something, put out a webcomic. So I don't know. I'm making a little bit of money off of it. It seems all right.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
we don't want to do advertising, so.
Yeah, no. Honestly, like the thing is I feel like to a certain degree on the internet that there's like eventually the good things will come out, and like I think it sometimes it takes time, and I like the fact that you're actually printing it or making print versions of it too. Did you say you're self-publishing, or is like because I know you're publishing it at Uncivilized Books, and I think you also did something through Study Group too, right?
Yeah, never like published anything through a Study Group, but Uncivilized printed Over the Wall. We just did a reprint, and they're going to print Stonebreaker too when I'm finished, with the full story. But I mean, I want to have things like to bring to cons and stuff. So I'll print off every chapter when I finish it, and I'll have just a very short print run, so I have something with me. Mm-hmm. But there'll definitely be a much edited, polished up version that'll get put out professionally from Uncivilized Books, or Odd, I guess that's their children's book line.
So I just have a couple more questions for you, and the last couple questions I have are about life in general.
Okay.
From what I've read, you work at Charles S. Anderson Design. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a rather renowned design company. I work in an ad agency, and actually, I want to tell you a quick story about that. My one of the art directors and the vice president of my company went down to Seattle for a press check, and while they were down there, they had taken a picture of this one box for paper that was in the paper that they were the paper that they were using for the annual report that they were printing was packaged in. And it was really funny because I was asking the art director, I was like, hey, do you know Charles S. Anderson Design? And she went on your website, and then she showed me a picture of that thing of the paper packaging, and it was on Charles S. Anderson's site. You guys designed it, which I thought was really funny. It was like
French paper, yeah.
French paper, yeah.
Shout out French paper.
Yeah. Anyways, I just thought that was a really small world thing. She like showed me this picture from her phone and was like, "Look, this is on there. Obviously, they're really good at what they do." Because they were like saying like, "We just want this as a print. We think this is great." Anyways, I wanted to ask. That's a big deal. It's a big company. How do you balance the day job, the design company job with your comic life, and how does having that day job enable you to handle your comic work differently, so you don't have to be bringing in the big bucks on your comics?
That's a good question. I mean, I haven't actually experienced the trying to have to bring in the big bucks on the comics, so no contrast again. But I think I've been lucky that my boss is pretty flexible, lets me kind of get the work done when I need to, like go off to conventions when I need to. So that's been great. And just having the financial stability gives you opportunities, gives you peace of mind, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's just finding. You just have to make the time. Like it doesn't matter if you're feeling tired or what. Just gotta sit down and draw. That's the hardest part. Yeah.
That's one of the big things for people who are just getting into comics and everything. Is like they always say, like the only way you can get into comics is make comics, and it's sometimes you have to do that at late nights, sometimes you have to do that on weekends, things like that.
Yeah.
But if you got a story to tell, it's where you go, I guess.
It's just a little crazy to do this thing, but I still enjoy it. So
good. Well, lastly, the last question I want to ask was, you're the third guest I've had in 5 episodes from Minneapolis, which is extremely not by intent. Little did I know it had such a burgeoning comic scene.
It's happening here, man. Like there's tons of comics coming out of this place. It's awesome.
It's crazy. I mean, I remember the first person I talked to from Minnesota was Peter Gross, who did this comic called The Unwritten, amongst other things, and Lucifer, and et cetera, et cetera. I'm curious, what's the comic life like there? And is it good for you as somebody who's kind of new to comics, having like-minded individuals and other cartoonists to pick the brains of?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. I mean, I spent some time at a little studio space, World Monster Headquarters is called. Do you know Xander Cannon?
Yeah. Oh, I love Xander Cannon.
Yeah, so that's his place. So, I work out of there. And just having, you have those resources, you have those people who kind of know things that you don't, or are sort of better at things that you're not so much, which is a huge help. It's probably one of the more important things, just to have that kind of that feedback, and that the people who can kind of like check you is a huge part of it. And Minneapolis apparently is a place where a lot of us live, so that's cool.
I had no idea Xander was there. That is funny. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger. Who knew? Who knew that Minneapolis is apparently the new hot thing?
That's right.
That's awesome. Well, good luck with everything. Thank you so much for coming on podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time. I'm looking forward to reading more Stonebreaker.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with cartoonist Peter Wartman. You can find Peter on his website at peterwartman.com, his comic site shipwreckplanet.com, on Twitter at @Peter_Wartman, and his webcomic Stonebreaker at stonebreakercomic.com. If you're a fan of the show, there's some big news. Off Panel now has a Patreon. If you like the show and want to support it, consider backing it on Patreon at patreon.com/offpanel. There are fun rewards and insider information you can get if you do. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Kat McKenzie, Lou Iovino, Christopher Carter, Nicholas Kesslake, Paul Lai, Brian Dickerson, Greg Rucka, Ryan Mail, Adam Heifel, Nicholas Gardner, Andrew Corrigan, Fiona Staples, Chris Morris, Johan Borander, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Abnett, Matt Battaglia, Alec Bernal, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim DiMonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. Don't forget to like the show on Facebook at /sketched. That's SKTCHD. Follow on Twitter at @sketchcomic, or follow me at @slicefriedgold. Want more from Off Panel? Subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher, and give a show a rating or review while you're at it. A quick thanks to the band Wolfpack, whose excellent track Outro from the album Volmilch opens and closes the show now. Give them a listen, as they're totally rad. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.